Everybody, this is Creemer, and I had Connor Sloan sit down with me for a quick little deck tech.
Hey everybody.
So Connor's been on mono green Tron for quite a while now, and he's really got his 75 down pat. So I wanted to take some time to talk a little bit about the deck. Take it away, Connor.
Well, most of you know how Tron works, I'm sure. You've got your basic, your Tron lands, your basic threat package. It's all real consistent. 12 Tron lands. It's always 19 lands. 19 lands is the correct number for the green X to mono green, green whatever Tron. It's always 19. A lot of people like 4 to 5 basics. I have taken up a unique 3 basics and 4 utility land spot slots.
Yeah, ordinarily I see like 5 and like 4 or 5 and then 2 or 3 over here. But you have
like
a
the 4
one-of utility package. Let's talk a little bit about each of these cards.
So Sanctum of Uggin's pretty standard. Most people play a minimum of 1. Some people even play 2. It's fetchable, and it turns any of your late game threat or mid to late game threats into another one. So the actual text on this is whenever you cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, you get to sacrifice. You may sacrifice it and search for a colorless creature. So it triggers on Uggins, Karns, World Breakers, sufficiently big Walking Ballistas, Ulamogs, and that's it. It triggers on all of those, and it goes to get any of these creature cards along the bottom here.
Yeah, so it lets you, when you play a threat, it lets you search your deck for the one that you actually want or need in that situation.
Pretty often against certain decks, like for example, Elves is a deck that I've randomly played against a lot recently. You play a Wormcoil Engine, on turn 3, and that gives you the amount of time to play a Walking Ballista into another Walking Ballista using the Sanctum of Ugin.
Fair enough. How about Horizon Canopy? This is
Horizon
an interesting
Canopy,
one here.
I would consider this the most flexible of these land spots for this. Very simply, it turns a late game Expedition map or Sylvan Scrying's draw into a redraw. It's not efficient on mana, but it doesn't need to be efficient on mana. It's Tron. You're going to draw this in the late game. You go get this, you draw a card, and sometimes that card wins you the game.
How about Field of Ruin? Most of the time in these lists I see Ghost Quarter. You have Field of Ruin. Any particular reason why?
So the card Ghost Quarter over the past year or so has become less good in Modern, I find. It's very good against this deck, but against most decks, it doesn't do a ton. I mean, everybody's playing more basics than they used to, with the exception of things like Humans. But Hollow One, they play 3 to 4. Bridgevine, they all play a few. It's less taxing than it used to be. And what this card does is the same thing. It does the same thing where it takes out manlands, because you never need to take out manlands for 0 mana. You can put 2 mana into a Colonnade. They're not going to pop that Colonnade off early in the game. It's going to be a while. So it takes out the manland threats. It takes out, you can still turn 3 like on the player on the draw, take out a Tron land in the mirror, and it replaces itself with one of these forests. And
last but not least, I always call you by this card. This is Connor's trump card, his signature card, Urza's Factory itself. Connor, tell us a little bit about Urza's Factory.
So Urza's Factory it looks really bad. It looks like a really bad card. I
don't know what you're talking about.
That's what it looks like when if you were to evaluate this card out of context, you go 7 mana for a 2/2, huh? Let's not. But what this actually is, similar to the late game redraw, this is a late game threat. This builds an entire board state. How many decks can you think of that can efficiently deal with a threat every single turn? And
really taxes their removal.
Not to say that a 2/2 is really a sufficient threat in this format, but a 2/2 every single turn, it chump blocks, it attacks, it does all sorts of things, and in some scenarios, I've actually used this line a lot, you can get one of these out, and if you don't have anything else going for you, you can Nature's Claim it and gain 4 life.
That's right. It's a mana sink, a chump blocker, or an attacker. Let's move on. We've got our standard Chromatic Star, Chromatic Sphere.
So, yeah. We got your 8 chromatic effects. Pretty standard. Both of them are more or less interchangeable, except in very specific circumstances. My favorite thing about the Chromatic Sphere is when you're playing against Lantern Control, which doesn't happen often anymore, but when you're playing against Lantern Control, they cannot respond to this draw effect. The effect of drawing a card is actually strapped to the mana ability, so it never uses the stack, priority is never passed. If there's something on top of your deck and they've got untapped mill rocks, you just say, okay, I want that, and they can't do anything about it.
Moving right along to Expedition map to set up Tron, get utility lands.
Pretty standard. Not a lot of explanation that needs to be done.
the full 4 Oblivion Stone has been really key lately, I think.
That
in the
is a
format.
big part of why mono green instead of green red or green white or green black is the build. The 4th Oblivion Stone as well as the Walking Blisses are what really make the mono green version so streamlined. And it really, the fact that this was printed and the fact that, this is just kind of a catch-all answer. You don't have to play those clunky 1-mana colored removal spells anymore. You can just go with these guys.
That's right. And then 3 Relic of Progenitus over here to round out the
this spot
the
I would
package.
consider this to be a flex spot. And a lot of times these come out when you go to sideboard decisions a lot. But main deck, relics give you a lot of game against the fairly plentiful graveyard decks that are running rampant in Modern right now, as well as Storm. And it's still a cantrip. It just cycles. Like, at its absolute worst, it just cycles. So you don't want to keep an opening hand that has 2 or 3 of these unless you know your opponent. Unless you know your opponent's deck, I should say. But the downside is very minimal, and the upside has potential to be very high, and the middle ground is very middle.
How about the green spells, the Ancient Stirrings and Sylvan Scrying? Let's start with Ancient Stirrings, which is a hot topic right now, a real point of contention in the format. A lot of people want to see this card go.
Well, there's not a lot to say about it. I mean, it does what everybody knows that it does. You look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you can just take a colorless card and put it into your hand. It's important to note that lands, obviously, no matter what color they produce, are colorless. And the fact that the only thing that it misses on in this deck is other copies of itself and copies of Sylvan Scrying and some sideboard cards. It
lends a lot of consistency to the deck.
Absolutely.
The deck gets to play Ancient Stirrings.
It doesn't have to. Absolutely not. One of the biggest problems I have with all of the arguments about banning Ancient Stirrings is they only really cite Tron and KCI as an example for why it should be banned. But the simple fact is this does not push either of those 2 decks over the top. It makes them a little bit more consistent, but both of these decks can still exist without this card.
Fair enough. Sylvan Scrying is like another expedition map effect to search out the piece that you're missing or get
very often your sequence is, Tron piece, chromatic, second Tron piece, crack the chromatic scrying. If you have that line, it's actually a little bit more efficient than doing the expedition map because you get an extra card draw out of it. But it's really, you just want 8 effects that say search for a land.
And then you have 6 spots for your Planeswalkers, 2 Ugin, 4 Karn.
This is a pretty tried and true, time-tested split. The 4 Karn, 2 Ugin. I personally believe that Ugin is more powerful of a Planeswalker. It usually impacts the board in a more meaningful way. But 8 mana means you can't play it on turn 3. It is having that turn 3 interaction.
Turn 3 Karn is like
turn 3 Karn is the line. That's what everybody's scared of. So that's why you play 4
and
what
2. Really makes the deck, yeah.
Some people actually cut the second Ugin in favor of a 3rd Walking Ballista or a Dismember in the main, which I don't play any of. I disagree with that, but I understand why they do it.
Sure, and now you have your creature package. We have 3 Wormcoil Engine, 2 Ulamog, 2 Ballista, and 1 World Breaker. Tell us a little bit about each of these cards. So start with the Wormcoil Engine. So
the 3 Wormcoil Engines, once again, a pretty tried and true, time-tested number of this card. A 4th, because this is probably one of the least impactful threatening cards in your deck. So playing, it's not a card that you absolutely have to see every single game, but it definitely, rocks the boat against a lot of decks. Playing it for what is essentially 3 mana, a 6/6 that makes 2 threats when it dies and gains you life and kills everything. It's just a solid card all around when you can cheat it into play with these guys. So you don't play a 4th because it's not the most powerful card in your deck, but it's definitely good to see. The 2 Ulamog, obviously your curve topper. Playing more is, I think, a little shaky. Some people actually do. I've seen some lists. There's a list that Owen Turtenwald actually posted recently in an article where he put a 4th Ulamog in over the 3rd Walking, or over the 2nd Walking Ballista.
A 3rd Ulamog over the...
Yeah. I don't think that is what I would ever want to do.
I like Ulamog because it lets you win through infinite life.
Yeah, it's a
other
really good
effects.
Win condition.
It can win you the game in spots where other things just can't
Absolutely, and it's removal interaction.
And it immediately affects the battlefield.
Yeah, it's interaction that frankly is really hard to get around. I mean, you can Nimble Obstructionist, so some people are playing that card now.
How about Walking Ballista? This is something that the old list didn't play, like the multicolor list didn't play.
Yeah, so the old versions of Tron never played this because they always had the 1 mana colored removal spells, Fatal Push and Path. And even before that, you had red with Pyroclasm, that sort of thing. This takes that spot, as well as the 4th Oblivion Stone in the new mono green version. Well, I say new, but the newer mono green version of Tron, where the Walking Ballista is just a very versatile creature. I often find myself throwing this out even through a Stony Silence just because it's a creature. It's not very efficient, but you know, it's something to help you tempo early game. You know, you can kill early infect creatures with it. You can kill birds with it early game. It's better on the play for sure, and it's a card that definitely comes out more than any of these other creatures do. But it's just a wholly solid creature. I mean, we saw Eldrazi Tron playing 4 of them. And once you've got Tron online, you can slam it on 3. Like a Walking Ballista on 3 on turn 3 is not terrible by any means. But then late game, it just turns into an absolute monster.
How about World Breaker?
World Breaker is interesting. I always think of World Breaker as the 2.5 Ulamog. It has a very similar cast trigger, which only answers, I believe it's, artifacts, enchantments, or lands. It only answers those 3 rather than any permanent like Ulamog does, but it costs fewer mana. You can't really play it on turn 3 unless your hand is real insane. So you can do Natural Tron with a Chromatic on the first or second turn. And you can use the Chromatic and 1 set of Tron to cast it on turn 3. But it has Reach, which is randomly very important. This is one of my favorite cards to see against Affinity. You take out their Inkmoth Nexus or their Cranial Plating, and you block whatever their biggest flying attacker is. And it's very hard to deal with. It has 7 power for some reason. It's just
7 toughness, reach, devoid,
7 toughness, right?
A cast trigger, and this little reanimate trigger.
Yeah, so you can pay 3 mana, 2 and a colorless, sacrifice a land to put it back into your hand from your graveyard. I've used that a handful of times. It's really only a big deal when you don't have anything else going for you. That is usually a worse line of play than casting any number of other, you know, game-affecting permanents.
It's good to have like that extra layer of resiliency.
Yeah. It's kind of a nombo with the relics.
Sure.
You know, like I said, that's really something that you don't need to prioritize that part of the World Breaker.
Let's move to the sideboard. Let's work our way from the bottom.
Yeah.
To
so
the top.
Sideboard, I'm sporting 4 Nature's Claims, 3 Thought-Knot Seers, 3 Thragtusk, 2 Spatial Contortion, 2 Warping Whale, and All Is Dust.
Tell us about the All Is Dust.
The All Is Dust. Well, currently there's just a ton of go wide decks right now. You've got Bridgevine, Hollow One, Humans. Elves is kind of making a big comeback, at least in our area. I'm not sure if that's widespread, but we've got a lot of...
both variations of Affinity. You're trying to play a lot of different permanents on the battlefield.
Affinity...
But that one doesn't work here.
Doesn't work against Affinity. This is not a card that comes in against Affinity. But it's just a real solid card. It's only a 1-of. It basically acts as a 7th board wipe against all those go-wide strategies. And it just incidentally triggers Sanctum of Ugin, which I used a handful of times. The Warping Whale and Spatial Contortion, it's just simple spot removal. So Warping Whale exiles creatures with power or toughness 1 or less. And it can also counter a sorcery. And I can also make a 1/1 Eldrazi Scion, which is much more relevant than you would ever expect. Last weekend, one of these weekends, I won a PPTQ. And Warping Whale played a really big part of that. The win-in, the last round of the Swiss, I used a Warping Whale to make one of these. It fizzled a Unified Will, and then gave me mana to cast a Karn and a Thragtusk the following turn.
That's big game.
It was a solid 3 for 1. It affected the game in a really big way.
I think a big part of being able to, you got to know what your cards do, man. And a big thing is being able to leverage this card.
So Spatial Contortion, admittedly not as powerful as far as, you know, just raw ability in the Warping Whale, but the Spatial Contortion, it's Lightning Strike. It's Lightning Strike in this deck because you don't want to play colors in your removal suite. Like a lot of people play this or Dismember. I just prefer this. Most of the time I found that casting Dismember is just bad against the decks that you want to cast Dismember against. Creature decks, aggro decks, creature combo decks is a different story. But like if I'm playing against Naya Zoo, I do not want to see Dismembers in my hand. Now, granted, the creature that I see most likely is going to deal more than 4 damage over the course of the game, but I'm giving them the free 4 damage up front and spending my resources on my turn, probably.
As opposed to making them have to earn it.
Yeah. But I like Spatial Contortion. It's just solid removal. It hits most of the creatures that Warping Whale doesn't, and very scarcely do you Warping Whale a Wormcoil Engine to get in for 9, because it actually says +3, -3, not -3, -3. So, you know, you can Warping Whale one of these bad boys, get in for 9, turn this into a 9/3.
And then the Thragtusks?
The Thragtusks, nobody will ever argue that this card is not one of the best creatures that's ever been printed. It really is. Shut up. It really is one of the best creatures ever been printed. It was a format warper in standard. It's used to play in some like fringe modern creature decks. I like it because it's just a solid way to drop your curve against a lot of things. I bring it in against Blood Moon decks over the Wormcoil engines usually. I bring it in against Burn. I bring it in against Jund, all the mid-range decks, Mardu, everything like that. It's so hard to deal with, and it, you know, if it's a creature deck, it fizzles one of their attacks and blocks 2 creatures. That's so good. The Thought-Knot Seer, again, a card that nobody will ever argue the power level of. A big player in the Eldrazi Tron deck of about a year and a half
Yeah,
ago.
that's another really great pickup from the Eldrazi Tron deck is the Thought-Knot Seer.
So we only play 3 in the sideboard. It's not insane in the main deck. It's not something that you want to see against mid-range decks or other, you know, like just like real straight aggro decks. It's cool to play against some of the creature aggro decks because it's bigger than most of the creatures that they have access to, and it takes another creature out of their hand or a spell out of their hand or whatever. You bring it in against Burn, it's a solid 2 for 1. You bring it in against, you know, combo decks like Scapeshift, and that just takes one of the combo pieces out of their hand. It's just an all-around good card, unless your opponent is really well equipped to deal with it. Then it's just kind of a bad Thoughtseize. The Nature's Claims.
And finally, the Nature's Claims, which you have a full play set of.
Yeah, the full playset. The 4th one was kind of a recent change that I made. It was originally 2 Karn Scion of Urza when the card first came out, do some testing, which was really solid, but as the meta shifted around, I found that I wanted to be able to deal with Blood Moons and Damping Spheres, which had also just come out, and that a little bit more. The second mode of Nature's Claim, of course, is Gain 4 Life that not a lot of people know about. You can Nature's Claim a token, like I said before. You can Nature's Claim a star, which incidentally still draws you a card. Nature's Claim a sphere or a map or whatever in response to, you know, removal or, you know, damage or anything. I have on occasion Nature's Claim my own permanent or an artifact of mine, usually an Oblivion Stone, in response to a Cryptic command that chose to bounce a target and draw a card. So you fizzle the Cryptic command, gain 4 life, and they do not draw a card because it doesn't target. But just in general, the card is a solid piece. You also get to fizzle Warp or Path to Exiles against your things.
Yeah, and then get your 2 tokens. That's big game. That's big game.
Really,
well, the deck looks really great, and you've just been slaying with it, man.
I really have. I've been having a really good few months here with it.
So, yeah. So if you guys are, if anyone out there is looking to play Tron, this is a really great 75 to play. And I'd like to thank Connor Sloan for sitting down and taking the time to talk and explain the deck.
Anybody who wants to review the full list as it currently is, I made a post on Reddit, r/TronMTG the other day with my full list talking about my PPTQ win. And there's one Star City Classic list that's probably still up that you can take a look at. That's a little bit older, but it captures most of what I'm doing here.
Well, hope you guys enjoyed that at home, and we're going to get the next round of our tournament going. Thank you very much.
See you soon.